Hi there, my name is Catherine Harrison, and I'd like to welcome you to The Power of Five. This is a series that brings together 5 behavior change specialists to talk about topics related to leadership and a whole bunch of other things that we find interesting. During the course of season 2, we touched on a number of topics. We covered trust, empowerment, we talked about authenticity and creativity. And in our most recent episode, we talked about how bad leadership impacts individuals, teams, and companies. And today we're going to be recapping season 2. And to help us do that, we have invited our special friend, Chris Taylor from Actionable. He has promised us that he's reviewed the episodes from season 2, and he's going to weigh in on his top line thoughts and some of his takeaways and some feedback on season 2, and just engage with us through the course of our conversation. So Chris, welcome to The Power of Five.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm so glad I actually watched them because this gives me, otherwise it'd be very awkward now coming into this conversation. So thanks for having me. This is a long-time listener, first-time caller. This is
great. Look at you, ding, ding. So I guess I'll just tee it up with having gone through the various episodes in who knows what order. What was some of your just top-line thoughts?
Yeah, top-line thoughts. I think if there was a sort of a theme across the whole season, I was reminded of the complexity and nuance that exists within the very simple word of leadership. And I think we all know it, but those of us that spend a lot of time in it, I think we get our own sort of track around what leadership means and the subpoints to that. And maybe we have a program or a book, but it's somewhat defined. And what's been really fascinating listening to you 5 talk about this is the overlap and the polarization and the range of views on some of these words. And it's the words. Like, I know all 5 of you relatively well, and I know that you all genuinely come from a place of core desire to see humans empowered, to see leaders and teams having human-to-human interaction, that people feel fulfilled. We could go on, but there's a genuine place of authenticity there and humanness. I just called you all humans, so you're welcome. But there's something about the word empowerment when you were talking about that episode on empowerment, and listening to Todd and Mandy very collaboratively have a disagreement about the strength of that word and where there's roles for it. So I think there's this fascinating, right, that we've had leadership for in a business sense for 150 years as a society, and we continue to define what the edges of that are as an actual word, and then positive leadership or good leadership and what fits within that.
And it's funny that you bring that up, because I think thankfully that happens in many of our episodes and in many of our off-camera conversations too. And we've talked also as a thread throughout our conversations around, cultivating and being comfortable with non-binary conversations. So when it comes to even a word that you can say, well, that definition and connectivity to it is true, and that definition and connectivity to it is true, and yeah, that definition, you know what I mean, which in and of itself I think is a really important observation. And how do we move into leadership opportunities in business and in community, et cetera, and really hold fast to that non-binary nature, so that we don't, even when we might disagree, we don't have conflict. We actually hope to expand, So anyway.
I like the collaboratively disagree. I thought that was, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because I think that there's something to strive for there, right? Let's collaboratively disagree on this.
Yeah.
To create a new outcome.
There you go.
Totally.
Was there one specific topic or word or conversation that you were like, wow, I wish I had been in there, because I would have loved to just chime in?
Honestly, the last episode, the most recent episode about sort of bad leadership in the White House and the Rickle Effect, the trickle effect of the ripple and trickle effect of that. I think there's a couple concepts in there that I wanted to dig into. I found myself talking to the recording, so thank you for that. But Sean, you made the comment about the echo chamber that so many of us have been in for the last 4 years in a political world, and how that's increasingly sort of exasperated by social media. And then and rightly so, transitioned into what does that mean in the corporate world? And I really started thinking about the ivory tower, or that position where the number of times that I've seen it, that I think you guys have seen it as well, where leadership believes and is reinforcing constantly a belief around an element of the culture or strategy adoption or something in the organization, saying everybody gets it. Yeah, we all get it. And we represent 1% of the company, but we ignore that latter part of the sentence. And so I thought there's something really interesting there around that, combined with Mandy, your comment about the first team, pulling from Lencioni's work about that senior leadership group, and how you can have both, right? How you can have a team that is fully in sync and fully capitalizing on external inputs on a constant basis. The wrap up to my point being that the more external stimulus we put in, the more challenged we might be as a group. And if we were fully in sync before, and Bill just brought in that information that none of us want to hear, Bill may not want to bring in that information because he doesn't want to disrupt the status quo, right? And so I thought there was something really interesting to dig into with that.
Yeah. So as a leader of an organization, what specifically do you do to try to ensure that that kind of, and I know it's an oft used term, that sort of safe environment of all info welcome, all perspectives welcome? What explicitly do you do to ensure that that sort of the 1% up here isn't making all of the conversations and forgetting about the folks who are doing the day-to-day work?
Sure, I appreciate it. I think we're not perfect at it by any stretch. I think we've come to that sort of awareness of there being an issue there. For those that don't know Actionable or the work that I do, we have a small team, about a dozen, and then we work with this exceptional group of consultants, many of whom are here today. There's about 90-ish consultants that we work with, and then those consultants work with senior leadership teams, about 500 last year, and those senior leadership teams work with their teams. So we at the Actionable core staff are, in many cases, 5 degrees removed from the end individual from a human feedback standpoint. And there's a danger with all businesses, and we've experienced this in the last year, of being removed from that and putting metrics in place, well-intentioned metrics around sort of improving the health of the business, but looking at those metrics as the be-all end-all, basically saying, these are the metrics that we need to move the needle on. For example, we introduced a net promoter score in the system a few months ago that is only for the consultant community. We made the choice that for phase 1, we'd just get the feedback from consultants. Well, consultants love us, which is great, but our net promoter score is like a 62 or something, which is insane, better than Apple, insanely high, except we're not talking to any of the end users or getting their input onto this. And so it'd be really easy to continue to stay in the happy bubble of everybody loves us. So more explaining the problem than the solution. But it's a real effort, right? Like, you have to push out to say, where are we going to go to find the uncomfortable truth? And can we bring that back to have a discussion about the uncomfortable truth?
Yeah.
It's just, honestly, I think, as cliche as it sounds, it's inviting that back in constantly, right? I think, one of the stickies on my desk is what needs to be said that hasn't been said. That if we heard something that needs to be said, but it's not going to make us feel great to say it, how do we invite that in? And so having some of those sort of safe words or places that we can invite that is, I think, a really important part.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to just throw it out to the rest of the, yeah, go ahead, Mandy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's important, and it resonates deeply with also what you've written about, Catherine, as well, is I read an article and it said that we have to start listening with curiosity as opposed to listening with generosity. And I think we're a very polite community of people, and we've been trained to listen with a mindset of generosity, of nodding acknowledgement, all that kind of stuff, and that we're polite and we're respectful. And there's some research that I've done, where we, with superior, whatever language, well, they use language of your superior, that you're very respectful of your superiors. If you just think of like some organizations that are no longer Enron, as an example, what happened, it got to such a stage that no one would challenge the guys at the top because they were too scared, because they didn't want to hear what they had to share. So I think we always make this big emphasis on making sure we're sharing information and we're being transparent, but I don't think we do enough on teaching people and encouraging how to listen with curiosity, not with judgment, not with I need you to justify that with more details and more facts. And if you think of how we've learned to listen, it's not really supportive of being curious.
Yeah.
Well, in particular, when our remuneration systems and other are reinforcing the hitting metrics, right? And we're not going to want to bring in if the metrics say one thing and it's a good thing, we're not going to invite in something that makes us look worse, right? In many cases, unless that's encouraged and invited, for sure.
Well, and you know what that reminds me of is early on in the pandemic, like week 3 or 4, I listened to a really fascinating virtual, obviously, conference of 4 futurists. And they were talking about, well, like what really is the future of industry? What is the future of innovation, et cetera? And one of them said that the focus has to get away from growth, which is all about metrics, and be more on progress, which is how are we getting better? And if we stay committed to always just growth, we don't look about, is this better or not?
Well, I think, sorry, Chris, I think it's actually one of those places where you do particularly well, right? Like, because you often socialize ideas with the full intention of, hey guys, blow holes in this, right? Like what can we do to like this is what we think is right. Now blow as many holes in it as you can so that we can make sure it's watertight, right?
I appreciate that. I think it's really hard to take feedback, particularly, I'm a fairly passionate individual. It's really hard to have feedback that even doesn't even challenge. Like, Todd, you've had comments before where I've had something and I've clarified the language on it and said, what do you guys think? Right. And then you're like, well, I think it could be bigger. Right. I'm like, that's great. Of course it's good that it can be bigger, but my immediate reaction can be resistance. And I consider myself to be fairly forward thinking on this stuff. So yeah, it's human nature, right? It's that nobody wants to feel like they were wrong.
Well, I think a lot of us, when we are seeking feedback, are actually seeking affirmation.
Yeah. Right.
What I really want you to do is tell me how great this is. Mm-hmm. Right. Instead of, tell me how this is going to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that comes back to, Todd, listening, right? So when you say leadership, it's about the culture of the company and listening to each other. And very quickly, I had a session today with an executive team, and just seeing how even in a Zoom setting, how they talk to each other and listen and joke and whatever, you get to see the culture. So how they would define leadership is very different than a lot of other companies that I probably wouldn't work with. But it goes back to Mandy's point too, of being curious and listening. And when you ask those questions, and Chris, these are 2 questions that you taught me, is, what does wild success look like? And they're usually, whenever I ask that to a client, they're like, oh, that's a good question. I'm like, I know, that's why I asked it. And then
that's why you
follow up, it's like, how are you gonna measure that? I'll never start with the boss. And then you start to listen, and usually what happens is the boss goes, oh, I didn't know that. Or they find some insight from their own team, because nobody's really asked that question, or nobody's really, like to Mandy's point, listened without the affirmation or being curious.
So, go ahead, Chris, finish up.
I was just say there's the Michael Bungay-Stanier question, one of 7 glorious questions, but the end what else, that I think becomes such a powerful tool as well to pushing through the it fits well in a cell on a spreadsheet answer, right? By drilling to get to the messy, to invite that piece that I hadn't yet considered, or you necessarily didn't have the confidence to ask yet, but because I kept pushing with and what else, you share something unexpected. And maybe it's that, right? The curiosity is really seeking the unexpected. If all we're getting is the answer we expected, we didn't need to ask the question in the first place, right? So if we're seeking the unexpected, I'm gonna write that down.
Joel?
I'll give you a minute to write it down, Chris, if you need it. But while you're writing—
this is recorded, Chris.
Oh yeah, we'll just snip this part out. But just interestingly enough, we keep coming back to not just leadership, but culture and what that looks like. In one of our first episodes this season, we talked about, you know, how does the culture inside an organization then bleed out to what the end customer sees? And I think that's one of the things that I've appreciated about Actionable and your leadership there is kind of setting the standard for not only who we're going to work with, right, and what they look like, but how we're going to treat each other and who has a seat at the table. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just how you see that even within your teams, of how setting that culture early on has allowed you to maybe grow more quickly, or, you know, look toward progress versus just growth, or just bring the right people in at the right time. Any thoughts?
Yeah, lots of thoughts, Joel. As always. So I think there's two layers. The consultant layer was easy. It's the next layer down that's actually an ongoing challenge for me personally. So again, Actionable works with a group of consultants who then work with their clients. Choosing the consultants to work with is actually really easy. The mentality has been, let's treat them as colleagues, not as clients. That's been the default stance. And so it's, how do you show up your best when you're working with a colleague, right? You show up with a work in progress that has a couple considerations of where we're going to go, but it's at a point of semi-completion that benefits from input, right? As opposed to, I don't know, figure it out, right? Or coming with a, here's the deliverable, Mr. or Mrs. Client, sir. It's really about that, embracing the somewhat messiness, right? Sort of professional messiness. How do we take it to that point where there's room for input? And so that's been a key part of it. And it's been interesting because, you know, I get a lot of accolades for the quality of the community, and I really appreciate that. I think it's it's more it's a result of a working style rather than it is a specific filter that allows certain people in, right? Like we're in recruitment conversations or whatever, engagement conversations with consultants. It has that level of fluidity to it, right? It's that this is how I show up, right? And we talk and have the discussion about where they're going and where Actionable can fit and where it won't. And some people are repelled by that because they want to be served, right? And that's not our audience. We work with the consultants that want to collaborate, right? That bring that passion and vitality to the work that they do. So that layer is actually really, for me, really easy. I think as we work to codify it, as we bring on sort of growth teams, it may get a little more challenging. Hopefully we have enough of an established base that there's a tone here. The layer that I'm really struggle with personally is when I'm trying to help consultants with working with their clients. It's a personal brokenness, but I have zero patience for the corporate world at all. And so I don't show up nearly as well in those conversations because I can't put on that consultant. Like you guys do, all five of you to a person do such a great job of showing up authentically and a level of professionalism that I know what's behind that. And so I know sort of the quirky, messy human being that you do a really nice job of showing. It's almost like a window that's not fully opaque. I can see parts of it, right? But it's still, right? Like you show up professionally when you're going out. So anyway, this is my own, it's like I'm on a couch, but this is the interesting consideration, right? Of who is your client and how do you show up for them? And are there sort of facets to that beyond?
So to that end, and just as we're beginning to wrap up, and we can be long-winded in our wrap-ups, Chris, so buckle up. I'll just throw this out to the team. I guess it's two-pronged, which is of all the things we've talked about, what is one key thread from 2020 specifically that still is quite explicit front and center for you? And I guess then the follow-up is, what about this new year with potentially, you know, new changes and shifts afoot? Do we need to really stay connected to? So I'll just throw it out to everyone, actually.
I think for me, you know, it's really funny. And today was really busy. And then I look back on a year ago today, and 95% of what I'm doing now and who I'm doing it for was totally different than it was a year ago. And the lesson that I share is to be open and to see new opportunities. But, you know, the honest thing was I didn't see them for myself for 5, 6, 7, 8 years until you're actually put into this situation that we adapt. And I really think it's, again, going to Chris's point about I hear you about the corporate frustration. I don't work with those companies anymore. And I wondered why I struggled for so many years, because I wasn't clear on who I meant to serve. So, I mean, I wrote a LinkedIn article last week about this. I had 2 client calls in June. One, and they both called me. So I wasn't pitching anything. They both called me. One said, hey, Sean, can you help with A, B, C, D, and E? And I said, yes, here's that. And he's like, great, send me an invoice. He didn't even ask the price. The other one said, okay, let me go to the boss, see if there's budget. Guess what? Spoiler alert, there's no budget. I'm not working with those people anymore. And people will say, how can you be so selective? How can I not? Because when we show up 100% as ourselves, the clients today, I'm like, oh my God, I get paid to do this? Oh my God, I fought against the corporate BS for so long. Now I work with family-owned businesses. I'm like really, really, really picky. I never had the courage to do that 9 months ago. And I think the big lesson is, I hope we're better versions of ourselves than we were a year ago. You know, we're here and healthy and alive. Like, let's celebrate that. But then let's play at that level that we're proud of. And you know, when you do that, that's when you attract the perfect client. When we stop trying to attract, that's when the attraction happens. That's what I would take away from, you know, the last 12 months.
I think that's a great story, Sean. And I think that's something that really resonates with me. And I think, you know, Chris, when you're talking about that interface with us and the it's almost that readiness to get messy and getting frustrated with the corporate clients. I think that's because I agree with Sean. For many of us, we've had the wrong clients, and it's been messy, and it's been pushing the whatever's uphill the whole time. And it is about us, and I think the community as a whole, and I know from the conversations the 5 of us have had, and I know the conversations that I've had with you, Chris, which have also been very challenging at times, because I've asked for feedback and you've given it to me, which has been awesome. I think that we're all so much stronger and so much clearer on who we want to work with. And I'm not going to use the word hope, because I've heard, what was it? It's anyway, there's an acronym. I've shared it on my LinkedIn with Lane Beachley, and she gives such a great analogy for don't use the word hope. And I think it's my intention is that I will work with different clients, with clients who, as you said, Sean, want to pay, want the transformational change that we are there to provide and support and guide. And I think the conversations that we then have with Chris will be markedly different. We just haven't had those yet because there's a bit of a lag. And my intent would be that you'll have very different conversations in the future, Chris, with the consultants because of the work you've initiated over this last year. Yeah.
Todd, how about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna riff off of something Chris was talking about earlier in creating community, because I think for me, connection was the name of the game through the last year moving into this year. And when I look at community and working with clients and so on, never in recent memory for me has the need to deeply connect with the people around us, see them as humans, understand them as humans. And what I love about what's happened over the last year is, this, we've often talked about, in the years gone by, right? Like leave yourself at the door, and we don't want you to bring yourself with you. And, like you have to show up to work and be ready to work. But now it's like, no, we get you. Like we get you as whole, entire people. And, Chris, when you talk about, actionable and the community and so on, and yeah, you're a little removed from the corporate client that we serve, but not really, because you know, the community that we all build is I think a riff off of what's been happening in the corporate community anyways. So I would use connection as that spot.
Joel?
So I'm going to go off riff off of something else too when we talk about community, and I think you know, one of the things I'm hearing from a lot of business leaders and business owners as we cross the threshold from 2020 to 2021 was this, like, now that we've got that behind us, we can, and then fill in the blank. One of the concerns that we've been sharing with each other is that beware the false summit, right? When you're climbing the mountain and you think, oh, we're almost there. It's just, you know, a few more steps. And then you get there and you realize, oh crap, I got a lot of climbing to do yet. So I think that's too, as we look at a 2020 that's been ridiculous, a start of 2021 that's been not a whole heck of a lot better, is just to understand we're going to have to keep putting in the work, right? We're going to have to keep showing up. We're going to have to keep leading well. We're going to have to be open to the fact that we don't have it all figured out and that we need to take people's feedback and actually do something with it. And at the same time, you know, be authentic, right? Like, here's where I'm at. I know my junk. I know my stuff. I know sometimes my stuff's a mess. And actually step into that and try to get better. And I think right now, the leaders, again, that I see that are adjusting well in this have kept that open spirit. Like, they're not looking for the finish line. They're not saying, boy, you know, if we just get to 2020, everything's going to be better. Or if we can just get past the election, or if we can just get to a vaccine. What they're saying is, we got to keep putting the work in, right? We got to keep getting better, because 2021 is going to bring something, 2022 is going to bring something, 2050 is going to bring something. And so, you know, I appreciate that about the group on this call and the people that we work with, and appreciate that about you too, Chris, as we've moved through 2020 and now into 2021, setting some big goals.
Yeah, and you know what the themes that I hear that are also really really dear to me for this year and beyond, forever actually, would be mindfulness. So even just holding that space of being present, being mindful, what is it that I'm actually trying to do and be all the time, so that you're even aware of those opportunities to connect or to create community or to ask questions or to listen better. The notion of ongoing adaptability, like we've talked about, I think all 5, 6 of us have talked, you know, change management, old paradigm, because it was like, there was this, then we went through this management thing, and now we're into this new, very stable and static, beautiful space. Not ever going to happen again, probably in our lifetime. So the notion of really learning to constantly adapt in a state of well-being, or optimizing your well-being, as an individual, as a collection of individuals, either in a family or a community or a business or a nation, is going to be really important. And then focusing on all that human stuff, because at the root of it, that's really where it's all about. So Chris, thank you for joining our little powwow. It was fun to have you here and adding your voice to the discussion. And of course, we also want to thank our viewers for joining us this season and this episode. And if you found this useful or interesting or frustrating and you want to, you know, let us know, please connect with any of us on LinkedIn, and keep an eye out for the release of our upcoming season 3. And bye for now. Take the best of care, and all the best for this year.
Thanks, Chris.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
for having me.
See you soon.
Thanks, Chris.